Hey, welcome back to the Ego Eraser Module 2 Active Thoughts. Welcome here, my friend. Today is going to be a jam-packed day. We have clearly a lot to get through, so I'm going to do my best to anchor myself in, not get too distracted by shiny objects, and help you facilitate even deeper, make that eraser even stronger, build up the overriding power of your mind to develop what we got in that last video. That last video, which if you haven't watched, go back because that's where you start to learn how to shape that spotlight, how to start directing the spotlight of your mind so that you can actively begin to create the cage, the mental frame that we will seal that brat once and for all. So again, we're beginning to build up this eraser and this overrider in your mind because part of you is this ego, and this ego is seeking to make you feel less than you are. It's seeking to make you think that you're disconnected. Remember, ego edging God out, edging that oneness with all things. It's trying to push that away. And it's doing so through a story that just continuously runs on your mind, runs in your mind. You get lost in thought. You know what that's like. You know what it's like to just be daydreaming and letting your mind wander and get lost and let the gears just loop and loop. I know what that's like, and I know you do too. And part of the reason you're here is to interrupt that pattern. So in this particular video, in this half, the first half, I wanted to go deeper and discuss with you the patterns that I got you to start thinking about in the last video. Remember, you want to create that awareness by shining a spotlight on the habits of body and habits of mind. You want to get a hold of the beliefs and understand what it is that you're setting in motion each day. Because once you create an awareness around it, remember the whole I'm an alcoholic thing, once you create that awareness, you admit what it is that needs to be focused on, then you can begin to deconstruct and reverse engineer what it is that's leading up to that so that you can change it. So in this particular moment that we're going to share together, I want to share with you patterns of the ego, the way the ego shows up, so that you can be armed to the teeth come later in the video when you learn the strategies to override all of this. But first we gotta figure out where those tracks are running. Remember in the last video we talk about, figuring out, the flow of the river, figuring out the way these roads are laid down so that you can start taking this eraser like a jackhammer and start ripping up the roads, start ripping them up so that we can lay down some new pavement that is more peace, is more prosperity, is more focus and movement in your life in the best direction. Okay? So, join me. Let's do this. Thank you again for being here. And let's begin. The first pattern to watch and override. Let's see. What is it? That is to catastrophize. To catastrophize. Now, the reason that you want to know about this word, the reason is because these are the minds, the people who, the voice in your head that's like one of those post-apocalyptic movies when everything is going wrong and the world has gone to hell. And it's the kind of voice in your mind that always thinks, everything's gonna go wrong, it's gonna collapse, I'm gonna fail, I'm such a failure, oh, the world is so terrible, nothing's ever gonna get better. That is catastrophizing. It's seeing everything as the worst possible outcome. Now I get it. There's a perfect time and place to worry about the things that are gonna happen and to have an expectation that perhaps things won't work out. But if you are the type of person or you have these thoughts that consistently and persistently insist that everything is going to shit, then it's time to take a step back, to retreat a little bit and just look at it for what it is. Again, watch your ego. Remember we talked in the last video about developing those focus and concentration powers. And we go even deeper on that in the distraction eliminator. So when you're done with this, if you haven't bought that or checked that out yet, I challenge you to build up your focus, build up your concentration, because with it, that eraser becomes even stronger. Stronger than the catastrophizing thoughts that say everything is gonna go bad, everything is gonna collapse, the apocalypse is now. No. The now is about peace. The now is about bringing into the present moment your focus and your action in a specific direction. That's why it's called focus. But with catastrophizing, it's the mind is scattershotting all this energy, saying it's all bad, it's never gonna get better, it's always gonna fail, and my computer just made a noise, so let me just quickly mute it. Mute. Forgive me. So catastrophizing, you want to start thinking about when this crops up in your life. Go ahead, if you have a notebook right now, start writing down. Pause the video, write down. When are the moments where you thought everything was gonna go to shit and it didn't? I want you to write that down. Take a moment, pause it. Pause it. All right, maybe you didn't pause it, but if you did, cool, thank you. Moving on now to B. What's under B? What's under it? Another pattern that the ego likes to crop up as is fortune telling. And fortune telling reminds me of, you know, that Tom Hanks movie? I don't know how old you are on the other side there, but the Tom Hanks movie where the little kid becomes Tom Hanks and he walks up to that machine with Zoltan, the fortune teller, with the crystal ball, and it's like a robot thing. Whatever. Fortune telling, it's in the name. It's looking at the world and deciding, I assume this is what it's going to be because I know that I'm correct. It's just this assumption that you know what's going to happen. And one way this takes form is in what's called the gambler's fallacy, where if you think, you know, this horse has run 3 races and won each time, on that 4th one, it's going to lose. It's fortune telling. It's making an assumption that, you know, has the probability of being true, but not the actuality, not the factuality of being true, knowing beforehand. Does that make sense? So you don't have the knowledge beforehand, but you're just assuming you do. And maybe that horse wins, and you're wrong. And maybe that horse doesn't win, and you predicted it to be true. But the fortune-telling aspect of the ego is this presumptuous thing that just says, I know what's going to happen next, and there's no way that I can be wrong. Do you really want to go to that extreme? Of course not. You want to hold back and just, again, retreat, get a bird's eye view over your mind, and realize that this monster is just making assumptions. This little thing is just trying to convince you of something that isn't really true. And it's your job to start looking at the patterns of things, looking at how often are you actually right about stuff. You might be surprised, because unless you've developed competence in that particular area and you're an expert, say at chess, then you might not really know what the next move is. So if your ego is telling you what it is, it's time to start pulling back, thinking a little bit more critically about what it says. And the next way that the ego crops up is through what's called mind reading. Mind reading. So remember that storytelling aspect of the ego and the mind that we've talked about at length. The fact of the matter is that when we get stuck in these mental loops, we make assumptions about other people. We, one, realize that they're thinking people. We realize that other people have thoughts. And the problem with mind reading, this egoic problem, is when we, two, think that these people are thinking about us. And not only are they thinking about us, but 3, they're thinking the worst of us. So it's like a combination of catastrophizing mind reading. So, for instance, my one client, he gets a little stirred up and he starts cleaning everything to feel a little bit better. And I watch him clean, and I sit there in awe just watching him, not really thinking anything, just meditating in the moment, watching. And he looks up and he looks at me and he goes, I always think that, you know, you think I'm crazy when you watch me clean because you're always so grounded, you're always so focused, and you remind me of my brother. And every time that you're looking at me, I'm like, oh my God, he thinks that I'm crazy because I'm cleaning. And I'm looking at him and I'm like, no, I don't think anything at all. You don't know what's going on in my head, my friend. And I'm sorry to say, but you're making a false assumption. And that's what the ego's trying to do in your mind and in the minds of so many other people. Think back to that example where, you walk in, you see your parents, you see your friend, and you're having a conversation with them, and all of a sudden they say something about you that you didn't realize they thought that. And you were thinking this whole time something else about them, not realizing that they did like you. Maybe you thought that, dad's mad at you for not taking out the trash last night. I know, terrible example for you, the adult on the other side. But you might be assuming that your father was upset when dad's just sitting there shooting the shit with you, not really upset about anything. In fact, he tells you, I'm really happy that you did really well in that last job interview that you did. And you're thinking, whoa, why didn't I realize that about Dad? I thought he was mad at me. Careful making assumptions about what people think, because it will lead you, again, to get lost in thought, thinking that remember, you're expending all this mental energy. You're letting yourself get pulled away by this little monster. You're letting the monster get bigger, and he's dragging you, along. And you can reclaim your focus, reclaim your attention by getting used to and becoming aware of when your mind is doing this. Let's move on. The next way that ego shows up is in those poopy colored glasses. When they say you're wearing rosy colored glasses and everything's just too good to be true. Well, this is the opposite. This is negative filtering. This is putting on, glasses. Imagine I'm wearing poopy glasses. This is what that's like. And I'm sure you know those people. And you might have even had an experience like this in your own life where everything just became, through the lens of cynicism, doubt, frustration, anger, hostility, not niceness, withdrawn, mean. Those crabby people, those grumpy frumps. I lived with one for years. He's my brother, and I love him to death. I love him so much that I realize, years ago, living with him, that he's got this negative filter. And, we love to look at contrast in life and realize, okay, if he's being like this, I certainly don't want that for myself. So I realize what this negative filter is doing to him. In fact, the negative filter is so strong with him that it was preventing him and shutting him down when he was experiencing fierce rejection. He went through one relationship after the other. And the story that we tell ourselves guides our lives. And the story that he was telling himself through this negative filter was that no one could love him. After 3 relationships during his 20s where everything just fell apart. He was dating one girl for 3 years, another for 2, and another for 1, and it took a lot out of him. And on top of that, he went on like 30 dates with 30 different women with all the online dating stuff, and you could obviously see he had reason to believe that maybe things weren't going to work out. But when I intervened, I told him, I said, look, brother, I love you, but this story that you're telling yourself, this way that you're seeing your life, is actually preventing you from inviting in the very thing that you want. What if that was the truth? And what if you changed the story? What if you changed the story and said to yourself, if I keep going, the right one will come. If I see myself as someone worth loving, the right one will come. And I kid you not, within 1 week, he was sitting on the couch with this, as I call the chocolate glazed look, because my brother loved donuts at the time. He was super overweight. He has since lost nearly 100 pounds on the keto diet. Shout out to you, keto people. But my brother changed the negative filter. He lifted it off. He became aware of it in that moment with me. He crushed it. He caged the beast, a little monster. He got it while it was even still pretty big. And within 1 week, my brother had found the woman that he is married to today. Hands down. One of the coolest things I get to share with you about turning this stuff around and what we do for our clients every day. So the next one is to label and overgeneralize. We're going down to the general store where everything is generally, the same. So label and overgeneralize. If you remember when we start this whole process together of learning about the ego eraser, I talk a lot about how the ego loves to place all these judgments on things and loves to slap labels on things and loves to put things in boxes. And that if you're going to begin to see things as they are without those labels, if you can begin and if you are going to work on and take seriously the letting in of the oneness experience, letting in that connection to all that is, then it's time, and I love saying it's time because the time is now, to start seeing things as they are by dissolving the part of your mind, by quieting the part of your mind. Quieting what? The part of your mind that insists on labeling things, on wrapping things up in boxes, shoveling them out, and making you, especially the special victim of your life. The special victim unit here. Not that, that show's pretty intense, but the ego is also super intense, and it wants to make you think and label you as someone who's generally overgeneralizing, always a victim, always the one that everything bad always happens to, the one that it's everyone else's fault that something bad happened. When we utilize this always style of thinking things are just always going to be this way, it's this full on too much. How do we put this? It's a way of looking at the world as if this is only the way things are. This is always how it's going to be. It's like a generational thing. The old people always say, oh, those young kids, they overgeneralize and they say, they never understand what we go through. They don't know why we don't want to pay taxes on the schools. Just kidding if you are a little bit of a senior bird. But the fact of the matter is that we actually create more tension in ourselves and we create more tension with each other when we slap labels onto things and we overgeneralize. Just look at racism in general. By slapping labels and stereotypes onto people, we're tearing at the cultural fabric that actually could and should and is best used uniting us. I'm not going to get lost in some sort of culture talk here, but the fact of the matter is that when you do label and overgeneralize, when you do this, when you let the ego keep making it an us versus them and splitting everyone off into these little things, you stop seeing things as they are. You're part of the human race. You're part of this earth. You belong here. You belong in this moment. This is a gift to be breathing, to be aware, to be alive. And those are good labels to put on the moment, but the moment is best experienced in between the silence. I'll leave you with that one to think about.